First story, The Midnight Sowing, 2023. It was just another ordinary day on our family farm, or so I thought. The sun was beating down on the cornfields, casting long shadows across the weathered barn as I made my way through my usual morning chores. I remember the smell of fresh hay and the distant lowing of cattle as I worked, completely unaware that my entire world was about to be turned upside down. It wasn't until late in the afternoon, as the sky began to take on the golden hues of sunset, that I first noticed something was off. At first it was just a feeling, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but the feeling persisted. As I finished up in the barn and stepped outside, my eyes were drawn to the sky above the cornfield. That's when I saw it, a rectangular object, impossibly bright and hovering silently above the swaying stalks. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, defying explanation. The object seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, its metallic surface reflecting the dying sunlight in ways that made my eyes hurt to look at it directly. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I don't know how long I stood there, gaping at the impossible sight before me. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the face of something so utterly alien. Eventually, I managed to tear my eyes away and ran back to the house, shouting for my family. By the time we all rushed outside, the object was gone, leaving nothing but an eerie silence in its wake. We spent hours scouring the property, looking for any sign of what we'd seen, but found nothing out of the ordinary. That night, none of us slept well. We tossed and turned, our minds racing with questions and possibilities. What had we seen? Were we going crazy? Little did we know, things were about to get even stranger. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if nothing had happened. We were all on edge, jumping at every little sound and constantly scanning the skies. It wasn't until around noon that we heard the sound of a car coming up our long driveway, an unusual occurrence on our isolated farm. As we gathered on the porch, we saw a sleek black sedan pull up, looking completely out of place among our dusty pickup trucks and tractors. Two men stepped out of the car, and I felt my blood run cold. They were dressed in identical black suits, crisp white shirts and dark sunglasses, despite the blazing midday sun. Everything about them screamed government agents, from their perfectly polished shoes to their expressionless faces. They approached us with an air of authority that made my skin crawl. "Good afternoon," one of them said, his voice devoid of any warmth or emotion. "We're here to investigate a reported gas leak in the area." My father, always the practical one, frowned in confusion. "Gas leak? That's impossible. Almost everything here runs on solar power." The men exchanged a look that I couldn't quite decipher before the second one spoke up. "Nevertheless, we need to conduct a thorough inspection of your property. For your own safety, we must insist that you remain inside the house while we work." Something about the way he said it made it clear that this wasn't a request. As they walked away, heading towards the cornfield where we had seen the object the day before, I couldn't shake the feeling that these men knew far more than they were letting on. What were they really looking for? And what did it have to do with the strange object we had seen? As we huddled inside the house, peering out through the windows, an unsettling silence descended upon us. The farm, usually alive with the sounds of animals and machinery, seemed to hold its breath. I watched as the two men in black methodically made their way through our property, their movements precise and calculated. They seemed to pay particular attention to the cornfield, spending an inordinate amount of time examining the area where we had seen the strange object. At one point, I saw one of them pull out a device I didn't recognize. It looked like a cross between a Geiger counter and a smartphone, emitting a soft blue glow as they waved it over the crops. My sister, always the brave one, suggested we sneak out for a closer look. But something in my gut told me that would be a terrible idea. These men, whoever they were, gave off an aura of danger that made my instincts scream to stay away. As the hours ticked by, the tension in the house grew thicker. My mom paced nervously while my dad sat at the kitchen table, his hands clenched into tight fists. I could see the worry lines etched deep on their faces, mirroring the fear and confusion I felt churning in my own stomach. It was late afternoon when the men finally returned to the house. The sun was beginning to dip low on the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch towards us like grasping fingers. As they approached, I noticed something odd. Despite having spent hours combing through our dusty, muddy fields, their suits were immaculate, not a speck of dirt in sight. It was as if they had been walking through a completely different landscape than the one I knew. "We've completed our inspection," the taller of the two announced, his face an unreadable mask. "There's no immediate danger, but we recommend you avoid the eastern section of your property for the next few weeks for your own safety." My father started to protest, demanding more information, but the men simply turned and walked back to their car. As they drove away, I caught a glimpse of something in the back seat, a metallic container that seemed to glow with the same eerie light we had seen in the sky. Before I could get a better look, the car disappeared down our driveway, leaving us with more questions than answers. That night, as we sat around the dinner table picking at food none of us had the appetite to eat, we tried to make sense of what had happened. But no matter how we looked at it, nothing added up. Why would government agents investigate a gas leak on a solar-powered farm? What were they really looking for? And what did it all have to do with the strange object we had seen? Unable to sleep. I found myself drawn to the window, staring out at the cornfield bathed in moonlight. That's when I saw it, a flash of blue light coming from the eastern section of our property, the very area the men had warned us to avoid. Without thinking, I slipped on my boots and crept out of the house, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would wake everyone up. As I made my way through the cornfield, the stalks whispered and rustled around me, seeming to warn me to turn back. But curiosity and fear drove me forward. The closer I got to the source of the light, the more the air seemed to change. It felt thicker, almost electrically charged, making the hair on my arms stand on end. And then I smelled it. A sharp, acrid scent that burned my nostrils and made my eyes water. It wasn't like any gas I'd ever smelled before. It was alien, otherworldly. Pushing aside the final row of cornstalks, I found myself in a small clearing. What I saw there made my blood run. Cold, the ground was scorched in a perfect circle, the corn around it flattened in an unnatural spiral pattern. In the center stood a small metal pyramid, no bigger than a shoebox, pulsing with that eerie blue light. As I watched, transfixed, the pyramid began to hum, the sound growing in intensity until it felt like my skull was vibrating. And then, slowly but surely, it began to rise off the ground. Panic seized me as the pyramid continued to ascend. its blue glow intensifying with each passing second. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there gawking, yet I found myself rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the impossible sight before me. The air around the object seemed to ripple and distort like heat waves on a scorching summer day. But the night was cool. As it rose higher, I felt a strange pressure building in my ears, as if I were deep underwater. Suddenly, a beam of light shot out from the apex of the pyramid, so bright it momentarily blinded me. When my vision cleared, I saw something that defied all logic and reason. Suspended in the beam was a small metallic sphere, rotating slowly. It looked smooth at first glance, but as I squinted to see it better, I realized its surface was covered in intricate swirling patterns that seemed to shift and change as I watched. The sphere began to pulse in sync with the pyramid, and I felt an overwhelming urge to reach out and touch it. My arm moved of its own accord, fingers stretching towards the hovering object. Just as I was about to make contact, a sharp pain lanced through my head, bringing me to my knees. The world around me began to spin, colors blurring and melting together like a surrealist painting. I closed my eyes, trying to fight off the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me, but that only made things worse. Behind my eyelids, I saw flashes of images I couldn't comprehend, strange symbols, alien landscapes, and creatures that defied description. It felt like my mind was being stretched and twisted, forced to accommodate information it was never meant to process. I don't know how long I knelt there, lost in that psychedelic nightmare. When I finally managed to open my eyes again, the pyramid and sphere were gone. The clearing looked undisturbed, as if nothing had ever happened. Only the lingering scent of ozone and the dull ache in my head served as proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Shakily, I got to my feet and stumbled back towards the house, my mind reeling. As I reached the edge of the cornfield, I froze. There, parked at the end of our driveway, was the black sedan. The men in black were back, and they were looking right at me. I ducked behind a tractor, heart pounding, praying they hadn't seen me. From my hiding spot, I watched as they methodically searched the area I had just fled, their strange devices beeping and flashing. Hours seemed to pass as I crouched there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The men worked with an eerie efficiency, collecting samples and taking readings. At one point, I saw one of them pull out what looked like a small silver cube. He placed it on the ground in the center of the clearing, and to my amazement, it unfolded itself like some kind of high-tech origami, transforming into a complex device I couldn't begin to understand. As the first light of dawn began to streak across the sky, the men finally packed up their equipment and drove away. I waited another half hour before I dared to move, my muscles screaming in protest as I straightened up. Cautiously, I made my way back to the clearing, but there was no sign of the silver cube or any of their other equipment. The ground looked untouched, the corn standing tall as if it had never been disturbed. If it weren't for the lingering headache and the vivid memories seared into my brain, I might have convinced myself it was all a dream. But I knew better. Something had happened here, something beyond my comprehension. And those men, whoever they were, knew about it. As I trudged back to the house, exhausted and confused, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever forces were at work here, whatever secrets lay hidden in our cornfield, I had a sinking feeling they weren't done with us yet. The following days passed in a haze of paranoia and confusion. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, jumping at every shadow and unexpected sound. My family noticed my behavior, of course, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them what I'd seen. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? Instead, I threw myself into farm work, hoping physical exhaustion would quiet my racing thoughts. But even as I toiled under the hot sun, I found my eyes constantly drawn to the eastern part of our property. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a glimpse of something shimmering in the air, like a heat mirage. But when I'd turn to look directly, there would be nothing there. At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events in my mind. The strange object in the sky, the men in black, the pyramid, the sphere. It all seemed too fantastic to be real. Yet the memory of it was so vivid, so tangible, that I couldn't dismiss it as a mere hallucination. And then there were the dreams. Every time I managed to drift off to sleep, I'd find myself back in that clearing, surrounded by swirling lights and alien geometries. In these dreams, the sphere would speak to me, not in words, but in concepts that bloomed directly in my mind. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, fragments of impossible knowledge fading like mist in the morning sun. About a week after the incident, I noticed something odd happening to the crops in the eastern field. The corn there was growing at an alarming rate, shooting up almost a foot overnight. Not only that, but the plants seemed different. The leaves had a slight bluish tinge, and the husks felt unusually smooth, almost metallic to the touch. I knew I should tell my parents, but something held me back. A part of me was afraid they'd dismiss my concerns, write it off as a particularly good growing season. But a deeper, more primal part of me was terrified of what might happen if they investigated too closely. Would the men in black return? Would we all be in danger? So I kept quiet, watching with growing unease as the strange corn continued to thrive. One afternoon, as I was checking on the livestock, I heard a low, pulsing hum coming from the direction of the affected field. It was barely audible at first, more felt than heard, but as I moved closer, it grew stronger. The sound seemed to resonate in my bones, setting my teeth on edge. As I approached the edge of the field, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The corn was moving, not swaying in the wind, but actually writhing, as if each stalk was a living creature. And in the center of it all, I caught a glimpse of something shiny and metallic rising from the ground. My first instinct was to run, to get as far away from that field as possible. But as I turned to flee, I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my head, like an ice pick being driven into my skull. I fell to my knees, clutching my temples, as a flood of images and sensations overwhelmed me. I saw vast, impossibly complex machines, worlds unlike anything in our solar system, and beings of pure energy dancing among the stars. Knowledge poured into my mind faster than I could process it, threatening to tear my consciousness apart. And through it all, I heard a voice, or rather felt a presence, communicating directly into my thoughts. "We have chosen you," it seemed to say, though the concept was far more complex than mere words could convey. "You will be the bridge." As suddenly as it began, the onslaught stopped. I found myself lying face down in the dirt, gasping for air, my entire body trembling. When I managed to lift my head, the field looked normal again. The corn stood still, gently waving in the breeze as if nothing had happened. But I knew deep in my bones that everything had changed. Whatever had visited our farm that night wasn't finished with us, with me. It had left something behind, something that was now growing, evolving, right in our own backyard. And somehow, for reasons I couldn't begin to fathom, I was now a part of it all. In the days that followed, I found myself caught between two worlds. On the surface, life on the farm continued as normal. We tended to the animals, repaired fences, and prepared for the upcoming harvest. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, I was acutely aware of the otherworldly presence that had taken root in our eastern field. The strange corn continued to grow at an unnatural rate, now towering well above the rest of the crop. I avoided the area as much as possible, but I could feel its pull, like a constant itch at the back of my mind. My family started to notice changes in me too. I'd catch them exchanging worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking. My mom commented on how I barely touched my food at mealtimes, and my sister swore she heard me talking in my sleep, in a language that didn't sound human. But how could I explain to them what was happening? How could I tell them that every night in my dreams I was traversing alien landscapes and communing with beings beyond our comprehension? The knowledge imparted to me during these nocturnal journeys was vast and terrifying. I learned of civilizations that had risen and fallen before our planet had even cooled, of technologies that could reshape reality itself, and of a cosmic plan so vast that our entire world was but a speck of dust within it. As the days wore on, I began to notice subtle changes in my perception. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more crisp. I found I could sense the electrical currents running through. The walls of our house could feel the vibrations of approaching vehicles long before they came into view. But with these enhanced senses came a growing sense of alienation. The world I had known all my life began to feel foreign, as if I was seeing it through new eyes. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after my encounter in the field, I was helping my dad repair the tractor when I saw them again, the men in black. Their sleek car pulled up to our house, and this time there were 3 of them. As they approached, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, fear, curiosity, and a strange sense of recognition, as if I somehow knew them. My dad greeted them, warily, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. As they spoke in low voices, I edged closer, straining to hear. Suddenly, one of the men turned and looked directly at me. His eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, seemed to bore into my soul. In that moment, I felt a jolt of understanding pass between us. He knew. Somehow, he knew exactly what had happened to me, what I had become. The men left shortly after, but their visit had shattered what remained of my normal life. That night, as my family slept, I snuck out to the eastern field. The corn had grown impossibly tall, forming a dense canopy that blocked out the moonlight. As I stepped between the stalks, I felt like I was entering another world. The air hummed with energy, and I could see faint trails of light dancing between the plants, like synapses firing in a giant brain. In the center of the field, I found what I had both feared and anticipated, a clearing, perfectly circular, where the ground pulsed with a soft blue glow. And there, hovering a few feet off the ground, was the sphere I had seen that first night. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I understood now that this was more than just an alien visitation. It was an invitation, a gateway to something beyond our world. As I approached the sphere, I felt my consciousness expanding, reaching out to touch minds vast and ancient. I knew then that I stood at a crossroads, not just for myself, but for all of humanity. Whatever lay ahead, whatever cosmic drama was unfolding with our farm at its center, I was now an integral part of it. As the sphere began to pulse, brighter and brighter, I took a deep breath, and reached out to touch its surface. In that moment, as light engulfed me and I felt my very essence being pulled into something greater, I had one last fleeting thought. Nothing would ever be the same again. Second story, the Sheridan Incident, Ohio, 2008. It was just another ordinary night at the Sheridan Hotel where I worked as a manager. October in Ohio can be chilly, and that evening was no exception. I remember glancing out the lobby windows, watching leaves skitter across the parking lot in the brisk autumn wind. Little did I know that this mundane Tuesday would mark the beginning of the most terrifying experience of my life. Around 11 p.m., Jim, one of our night security guards, burst through the staff door, his face pale and eyes wide with shock. He grabbed my arm, pulling me aside, and started rambling about strange lights in the sky. At first, I thought he was joking, or maybe had one too many energy drinks during his shift. But the tremor in his voice and the way his hands shook as he pointed towards the window made me realize he was dead serious. Skeptical but curious, I followed him outside. The moment we stepped into the parking lot, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There, hovering silently above the tree line, was an object I can only describe as otherworldly. It was disc-shaped, emitting a soft, pulsating blue glow that seemed to distort the air around it. As we stood there, frozen in disbelief, the object suddenly shot straight up into the night sky, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Jim and I exchanged bewildered looks, both of us struggling to process what we had just witnessed. Little did I know, this sighting was just the beginning of a series of events that would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about reality. For the next 2 weeks, life at the hotel seemed to return to normal. Jim and I had agreed to keep quiet about what we saw, fearing ridicule or worse, losing our jobs if word got out. But there was an undeniable tension in the air, a sense that something had fundamentally changed. I found myself jumping at every sudden noise, peering out windows more often than usual, half expecting to see that eerie blue glow again. Then, on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, everything took a turn for the bizarre. I was in my office going over some paperwork when Sarah, one of our receptionists, knocked on my door. Her face was ashen, and she seemed hesitant to speak. When she finally did, her words sent a chill down my spine. "Shane," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there are 2 men here asking for you and Jim. But there's something not right about them." Confused and admittedly a bit scared, I asked her what she meant. Sarah described 2 tall men dressed in impeccable black suits, with pale skin that seemed almost translucent under the lobby lights. But it was their eyes that had unnerved her the most, dark, unblinking, and utterly devoid of emotion. As she spoke, I felt a growing sense of dread. Somehow I knew these visitors were connected to what Jim and I had seen that night. With a deep breath to steady my nerves, I told Sarah to keep an eye on them and headed out to the lobby. As soon as I stepped out of the office, I saw them. 2 figures stood motionless by the front desk, their stillness so complete it was as if they were wax statues. They turned in perfect unison as I approached, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. Sarah's description hadn't done justice to how utterly alien these beings appeared. Their suits were immaculate, yes, but they hung on their bodies in a way that suggested an unfamiliarity with human clothing. Their skin was pallid and smooth, almost plastic-like, with no visible pores or imperfections. But it was their faces that truly terrified me. They had no eyebrows, no eyelashes, and their eyes. God, their eyes. They were completely black, like polished obsidian, reflecting the lobby lights in a way that made them seem bottomless. When one of them spoke, his lips barely moved, and the voice that emerged was flat and emotionless, with an accent I couldn't place. "Shane Sovar," it said, not a question but a statement. "We need to discuss what you saw." In that moment, standing there under the scrutiny of those inhuman eyes, I knew with absolute certainty that these were not men. Whatever they were, they had come because of that night, and I had a sickening feeling that my life was about to change forever. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as I led these beings to a more private area of the hotel. We ended up in a small conference room, and as I closed the door behind us, I felt like I was sealing my fate. The two men moved with an eerie synchronicity, taking seats across from me without a sound. Up close, their otherworldliness was even more apparent. Their skin had a waxy sheen to it, and I couldn't detect any sign of breathing or subtle movements that you'd expect from living creatures. The one on the left spoke first, its voice a monotone that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my skull. "You witnessed something on October 14th. Describe it." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. How did they know the exact date? I hadn't told anyone, not even my wife. I opened my mouth to speak, but my voice failed me at first. When I finally managed to form words, I found myself spilling everything. The strange lights, the disc-shaped object, the impossible speed at which it vanished. As I spoke, their black eyes remained fixed on me, unblinking, unmoving. It was like talking to statues, and yet I could feel an intense intelligence behind those obsidian orbs dissecting my every word. When I finished recounting that night's events, an oppressive silence fell over the room. The being on the right tilted its head at an unnatural angle, as if considering something. Then, without warning, it raised its hand. The motion was too smooth, too precise to be human. I flinched, expecting, well, I don't know what I expected. But what happened next defied all logic. The air around its hand seemed to ripple and distort, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. And then, floating above its palm, a perfect miniature replica of the craft I had seen appeared. It rotated slowly, every detail exact, right down to the soft blue glow. My mind reeled. This was impossible. I blinked hard, convinced I must be hallucinating. But when I opened my eyes, the miniature UFO was still there, hovering impossibly in the air. The being spoke, its voice carrying an undertone that made my teeth ache. "This is what you saw, but you did not see it." The contradiction made my head spin. What did that even mean? Before I could ask, the left one chimed in, its words hitting me like physical blows. "You will forget. You must forget. For your safety. For everyone's safety." As it spoke, I felt a strange pressure building in my head, a dull ache that quickly intensified into a searing pain. I clutched at my temples, gasping as the pain grew unbearable. Through watering eyes, I saw the miniature craft flicker and disappear. The being stood in perfect unison, looming over me as spots danced in my vision. "You will forget," they repeated in eerie harmony. And then, just as suddenly as the pain had started, It stopped. I blinked, disoriented, to find myself alone, in the conference room. The chairs across from me were empty, showing no sign that anyone had been sitting there moments ago. Had I imagined the whole thing? But no, the lingering ache in my head and the cold sweat soaking my shirt were all too real. I staggered to my feet, my legs shaky, and made my way back to the lobby. Sarah looked up as I approached, concern etching her features. "Are you okay, Shane? You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth to tell her about the strange men, about their impossible demonstration and cryptic warnings. But the words wouldn't come. It was as if there was a mental block, a wall in my mind that I couldn't breach. I mumbled something about not feeling well and retreated to my office, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and half-formed memories. The next few days passed in a haze of confusion and paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something fundamental had changed in my world. Every time I tried to focus on what had happened in that conference room, my thoughts seemed to slip away like smoke through my fingers. It was maddening. I found myself obsessively checking the security cameras, rewinding and replaying the footage from that day. But no matter how many times I watched, I couldn't find any trace of the two strange men. It was as if they had never existed. Jim, the security guard who had originally seen the UFO with me, seemed equally affected. He avoided me at work, and when we did cross paths, there was a haunted look in his eyes that mirrored my own inner turmoil. One night, about a week after the incident, I cornered him in the empty parking lot during his break. "Jim," I said, my voice low and urgent, "we need to talk about what happened." He flinched at my words, his eyes darting around as if expecting those men in black to materialize out of thin air. I don't know what you're talking about, Shane," he stammered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Please just leave it alone, for both our sakes." His reaction only fueled my determination to uncover the truth. That night, after my shift ended, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the outskirts of town, to the spot where Jim and I had first seen the UFO. The autumn air was crisp, and a full moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. As I stood there, staring up at the stars, I felt a strange, tingling sensation creep up my spine. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but it grew stronger with each passing moment. Then, without warning, the world around me seemed to shift. The moonlight took on an otherworldly quality, and the shadows began to move in ways that defied natural laws. I blinked hard, convinced I must be hallucinating. But when I opened my eyes, the distortions had only intensified. The trees seemed to bend and twist, their branches reaching towards me like grasping fingers. And in the sky above, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the disc-shaped craft from before, but something far more terrifying. A massive dark shape blotted out the stars, its edges shimmering with an energy that hurt my eyes to look at directly. As I stood there, frozen in terror, I felt a presence behind me. I didn't dare turn around, but I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that if I did, I would see those emotionless black eyes staring back at me. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst from my chest. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there paralyzed with fear. But my body wouldn't respond. It was as if I had become a puppet, my strings held by some unseen force. The air around me grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle and my hair stand on end. And then I heard it. A voice, if you could call it that. It didn't come from behind me or from the sky or from anywhere I could pinpoint. It seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, reverberating in my skull with a force that threatened to shatter my sanity. "You seek answers," it said, each word feeling like a physical blow. "But you are not ready for the truth." Images began to flash through my mind, too fast for me to process fully, but each one leaving an imprint of terror and awe. I saw impossible landscapes, creatures that defied description, and technologies so advanced they seemed like magic. And through it all, I felt an overwhelming sense of insignificance, as if I were an ant suddenly given a glimpse of the cosmos. The experience was too much for my human mind to handle. I felt something inside me begin to crack under the strain. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, when I was certain my mind would shatter under the weight of these revelations, everything stopped. The strange energy dissipated, the visions faded, and I found myself on my knees in the damp grass, gasping for air. The night was quiet once more, the trees still, the sky normal. But I knew with absolute certainty that what I had experienced was real. As I struggled to my feet, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, in a perfect circle around where I had been standing, the grass was flattened and scorched, as if subjected to intense heat. I staggered back to my car, my mind reeling, trying desperately to make sense of what had just happened. As I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been given a glimpse of something humans were never meant to see. The world suddenly felt alien and threatening, full of hidden truths and unseen watchers. I knew I could never look at the night sky the same way again. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following my every move. At work, I went through the motions like a ghost, barely able to focus on my tasks. My colleagues noticed the change in me, their concerned glances and whispered conversations only adding to my growing sense of isolation. I began to see patterns where there were none, hidden meanings in everyday occurrences. The hum of the hotel's air conditioning system suddenly sounded like coded messages. The arrangement of cars in the parking lot seemed to form constellations that shifted and changed when I wasn't looking. I knew I was spiraling, but I couldn't stop it. One night, as I was locking up the hotel, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the lobby's glass doors. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. My eyes were sunken, ringed with dark circles, and there was a wild, haunted look in them that scared me. I realized then that I was standing on the edge of a precipice, and if I didn't find a way to cope with what had happened, I would fall into an abyss from which there might be no return. In a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control, I decided to confide in someone. After much deliberation, I chose to talk to my older sister, Lisa. She had always been the level-headed one in our family, and I hoped she might be able to offer some perspective. We met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far from the prying eyes I constantly felt were upon me. As I poured out my story, my voice shaking and my hands clutching my coffee mug like a lifeline, I watched Lisa's expression change from concern to disbelief to something akin to fear. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence between us. Finally, Lisa reached across the table and took my hand in hers. "Shane," she said gently, her eyes filled with worry, "I think you need help. Professional help." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I pulled my hand away, anger and disappointment surging through me. "You don't believe me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Lisa's face softened. "It's not that I don't believe you're experiencing something," she replied carefully, "but what you're describing, it's not possible, Shane. And I'm worried about you." As I left the cafe, my sister's words echoing in my head, I felt more alone than ever. If my own family couldn't understand, who could? The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and paranoid days. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, monitored, studied. Every flickering light, every unexplained sound, every shadow in the corner of my eye seemed to hold sinister significance. I started seeing patterns everywhere, in the arrangement of leaves on the sidewalk, in the license plates of passing cars, in the static on my TV screen. It was as if the universe itself was trying to communicate with me, but in a language I couldn't quite decipher. My work at the hotel suffered. I caught myself staring blankly at security monitors for hours, convinced I'd see those men in black appear. Guests complained about my erratic behavior, and my boss pulled me aside more than once to express concern. But how could I explain what was happening? How could I make anyone understand the weight of the knowledge I now carried? I felt like I was drowning in a sea of cosmic truths, too vast for my human mind to comprehend. One night, as I sat in my darkened living room, the TV casting flickering shadows on the walls, I had a moment of clarity. I realized that this obsession, this constant search for answers, was destroying me. But I couldn't stop. The need to know, to understand, had become as essential as breathing. I was caught in a web of my own making, tangled in threads of conspiracy and cosmic horror. It was around this time that strange things started happening in my apartment. At first, it was small things, objects not where I'd left them, the feeling of a presence when I was alone, the sound of footsteps when there was no one else around. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just stress and lack of sleep playing tricks on my mind. But then things escalated. One morning I woke to find all the clocks in my apartment stopped at 3:33 a.m. Another day, I came home to find every book on my shelves turned backwards, spines facing the wall. And then there were the dreams, vivid, terrifying dreams of vast, alien landscapes of beings made of light and shadow, of knowledge so profound it threatened to tear my mind apart. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my sheets tangled around me, the echo of otherworldly voices still ringing in my ears. The line between reality and nightmare began to blur. I started to question everything, my memories, my perceptions, my very existence. Was I going mad? Or was I finally seeing the world as it truly was? The uncertainty was maddening. I found myself avoiding mirrors, afraid of what I might see looking back at me. The person I had been before that fateful night in October seemed like a stranger now, a naive fool who had no idea of the truths that lurked just beyond the veil of ordinary reality. As weeks turned into months, I felt myself slipping further and further away from the world I once knew. My family's attempts to help only pushed me further into isolation. I quit my job at the hotel, unable to bear the weight of normality any longer. I spent my days researching UFO sightings, alien abductions, government cover-ups, anything that might help me make sense of what I had experienced. My apartment walls became a tangled web of newspaper clippings, blurry photographs, and hand-scrawled notes. I was looking for patterns, connections, anything that might lead me to the truth. But the more I uncovered, the more questions I had. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with pieces from 1,000 different sets. And always, I felt watched. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a glimpse of a tall, pale figure in a black suit. But when I'd turn to look, there would be nothing there. Just empty air and the lingering sensation of otherworldly presence. As I sit here now, typing this out on a forum I never thought I'd find myself on, I can't help but wonder, what's next? Will they come for me again? Will I finally get the answers I've been searching for? Or am I doomed to live the rest of my life in this limbo, caught between two worlds, never fully belonging to either? All I know is that the universe is vast and strange, filled with truths we can barely comprehend. And once you've glimpsed what lies beyond the veil, there's no going back. To anyone reading this, be careful what you wish for. Some knowledge comes at a terrible price. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is just below this video. It's safe, easy, and fast. No registration required. Even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story, from spreadsheets to alien streets. It was just another ordinary Tuesday evening when my life took an unexpected turn that I still can't fully comprehend. I work as an accountant, and I was driving home from a late night at the office, my mind consumed with spreadsheets and tax calculations. The road was mostly empty, winding through the countryside, and I was looking forward to finally getting home and relaxing. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a weird reflection on my windshield, maybe from a passing car or a streetlight. But as I focused on it, I realized this was something entirely different. Hovering silently above the trees was an object that defied explanation. It was disc-shaped, probably about the size of a large SUV, with pulsating lights around its edge that shifted from blue to green to a deep, unsettling red. I've never seen anything move the way this thing did. It glided through the air effortlessly, as if gravity was just a suggestion. My heart started racing and I fumbled for my phone, desperate to capture what I was seeing. I managed to pull over to the side of the road, my hands shaking as I tried to steady my phone and record a video. The object continued to hover for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two. Then, without warning, it shot straight up into the sky at an impossible speed, leaving behind a faint trail of light that quickly faded away. I sat there in my car for a while, trying to process what I just witnessed. Part of me wondered if I was just overtired and imagining things, but the video on my phone proved otherwise. I watched it back probably a dozen times, still in disbelief. The clarity of the footage was surprising. You could clearly see the shape of the craft and the strange, almost organic way its lights pulsed and shifted. I knew I had to share this. My hands were still shaking as I tried to upload the video to Reddit. I figured people there might have some theories or explanations, or maybe someone else had seen something similar. But as soon as I hit post, my phone's signal dropped completely. I frowned, checking my bars. Nothing. It was weird because I usually had great reception on this stretch of road. I decided to head home and try uploading it there. The drive felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream. Every shadow and glint of light in my rearview mirror made me jump, half expecting to see that craft again. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Home. Safe. I could finally relax and try to make sense of what had happened. I had just settled onto my couch, phone in hand, ready to try uploading the video again, when I heard it. 3 loud, authoritative knocks on my front door. I froze. It was nearly midnight. Who could possibly be visiting at this hour? The MiB knocks came again, even louder this time, almost aggressive. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly approached the door. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men standing on my porch. They were dressed entirely in black suits, which wouldn't have been that odd if it weren't for the fact that their faces were completely obscured by some kind of dark mesh or veil. My heart felt like it was trying to pound its way out of my chest. Everything in me screamed that this was wrong, that I shouldn't open the door. But before I could decide what to do, one of them spoke. "Open the door immediately. We know you're home." The voice was cold, emotionless, and left no room for argument. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. The 2 men loomed over me, and I could see now that they were both armed, sleek black pistols holstered at their sides. "Your phone, give it to us now," the one on the left demanded, holding out a gloved hand. My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. How did they know about my phone? About the video? I hesitated, clutching my phone tightly. I don't understand. Who are you? What's this about?" I managed to stammer out. The man on the right took a step forward, his hand moving subtly towards his holstered weapon. "We don't have time for questions. The phone, now." His tone left no room for argument, and a wave of fear washed over me. I felt like I was in some surreal nightmare, but the pounding of my heart and the cold sweat on my palms told me this was all too real. With shaking hands, I held out my phone. The moment it left my grasp, I felt a strange sense of loss, as if I was giving away more than just a device. The man on the left snatched it quickly, turning it over in his hands as if searching for something. "Is this the only copy of the video?" he demanded. I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. How did they know about the video? My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of it all. What happened next is still a blur in my memory. I remember the men exchanging a look, and then one of them pulled out a small device from his pocket. It looked almost like a pen, but when he clicked it, a bright flash filled my vision. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on my living room floor, my head pounding and my vision blurry. Sunlight was streaming through the windows. Somehow, hours had passed. I stumbled to my feet, my legs wobbly and my mind foggy. It took me a few moments to remember the events of the night before, and when I did, a cold dread settled in my stomach. I frantically searched my pockets, my counters, everywhere, but my phone was gone, vanished along with any evidence of what I'd seen. I tried to piece together what had happened after they took my phone, but it was like trying to grab smoke. There were just gaps in my memory, blank spaces where time should have been. The more I tried to remember, the more my head hurt, like there was some kind of mental block in place. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that it had all been some kind of vivid dream or hallucination. Maybe I'd been working too hard, and my mind had conjured up this elaborate scenario. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The fear I felt was too real, the memory of that craft too vivid. I went to the police station to report the incident, But as soon as I mentioned the UFO and the men in black, I saw the skepticism in the officer's eyes. He took my statement, but I could tell he didn't believe a word of it. I couldn't blame him. If someone had told me this story a week ago, I wouldn't have believed it either. I tried searching online for similar experiences, but every time I started digging too deep, my internet connection would mysteriously cut out. It was as if some unseen force was trying to keep me from uncovering the truth. I even drove back to the spot where I'd seen the UFO, hoping to find something. A trace of evidence, a scorch mark on the ground, anything. But there was nothing. The road looked exactly the same as it always had, giving no hint of the extraordinary event that had taken place there. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every unexpected sound. The encounter with those men in black had left me deeply shaken, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Sometimes when I was driving home from work, I'd catch glimpses of black cars in my rearview mirror, always maintaining the same distance. Were they following me, or was I just being paranoid? I started taking different routes home, varying my schedule, anything to throw off potential surveillance. But no matter what I did, that nagging feeling of being observed never went away. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch, a constant presence in the back of my mind. I tried to talk to friends about what had happened, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They'd give me concerned looks, suggest I take some time off work, maybe see a therapist. But how could I explain that this wasn't stress or overwork? That what I'd experienced was real and had fundamentally changed my perception of reality? The loss of my phone turned out to be more than just an inconvenience. It was as if a part of my life had been erased. Photos, contacts, important work, documents, all gone. I had to explain to my boss that I'd lost my phone, and the look of annoyance on his face made it clear he thought I was irresponsible. But that was nothing compared to the gnawing frustration of knowing that the most important thing on that phone, the video evidence of what I'd seen, was now in the hands of who? The government? Some secret organization? Aliens themselves? The questions kept me up at night, my mind racing with possibilities, each one seeming more far-fetched than the last. I found myself spending hours online, diving deep into UFO forums and conspiracy theory websites. Some of the stories I read sent chills down my spine. Accounts of similar encounters with strange craft and mysterious men in black suits. It was both comforting and terrifying to know I wasn't alone in my experience. But for every story that seemed credible, there were dozens that were clearly hoaxes or the ramblings of disturbed individuals. How could I separate the truth from the fiction? And more importantly, where did my own experience fit into all of this? About a month after the incident, something happened that made me question everything all over again. I was at work, buried in a particularly complex audit, when my computer suddenly froze. The screen went black for a moment, and when it came back on, there was a single text document open. The message inside was brief. Forget what you saw, for your own safety. My blood ran cold. I quickly looked around the office, but everyone else was engrossed in their own work, oblivious to my panic. I tried to save the document, to take a screenshot, anything to preserve this evidence. But as soon as I moved my mouse, the document disappeared and my computer returned to normal as if nothing had happened. I sat there, my heart pounding, unsure if what I'd just seen was real or if I was finally losing my grip on reality. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on my work, my mind constantly replaying that message. Who had sent it? How had they accessed my computer? And what did they mean by "for your own safety"? Was it a threat or a genuine warning? That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that this experience had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. The world no longer felt solid or predictable. Behind the veneer of everyday life, there were depths of mystery and potential danger that I had never imagined. The weeks that followed were a roller coaster of emotions and bizarre occurrences. I started noticing strange patterns in my daily life that I couldn't explain away as coincidence. Every morning at exactly 3:33 a.m. I'd wake up with a start, feeling a presence in my room. I'd lay there frozen in fear, unable to move or even open my eyes fully. The air would feel thick and charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. And then, as suddenly as it began, the feeling would pass, leaving me drenched in sweat and questioning my sanity. I installed cameras in my apartment, hoping to catch something on film, but every time I checked the footage, there would be an inexplicable gap during those early morning hours. It was as if time itself was being manipulated around me. I started losing track of time in other ways, too. I'd leave for work in the morning and suddenly find myself at my desk with no memory of the commute. Co-workers would reference conversations we'd apparently had, but I had no recollection of them. It was like my life was becoming a Swiss cheese of missing moments, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening during those blank spots. As my grip on reality continued to slip, I became obsessed with finding answers. I spent every free moment researching UFO sightings, alien abductions, and government cover-ups. I created elaborate charts and timelines, trying to connect my experience to other reported incidents. My apartment walls became covered in printouts, post-it notes, and red string, like something out of a detective movie. I knew how it would look to an outsider, but I couldn't stop. The need to understand, to make sense of what had happened to me, was all-consuming. I started reaching out to other people who claimed to have had similar experiences. Most ignored me or thought I was crazy, but a few responded. We formed a sort of support group, sharing our stories and theories via encrypted messaging apps. It was a relief to talk to people who understood, who didn't look at me like I was losing my mind, but it also deepened my fears. If all these people were telling the truth, then the implications were staggering. It suggested a level of alien presence and government conspiracy far beyond anything I had imagined. Then came the night that changed everything once again. I had finally managed to fall into a fitful sleep when I was jolted awake by a blinding light flooding my bedroom. At first I thought it was morning, but a glance at my clock showed it was just after midnight. The light was coming from outside, pulsing with an otherworldly intensity. I stumbled to the window, my heart in my throat. There, hovering just above the street, was a craft identical to the one I had seen months ago. Its metallic surface gleamed in the moonlight, those same mesmerizing lights pulsing around its perimeter. I stood there, transfixed, a mix of terror and awe washing over me. Part of me wanted to run, to hide, but a stronger part knew this might be my only chance to get answers. As if responding to my thoughts, a beam of light suddenly emanated from the craft enveloping me. I felt a strange tingling sensation all over my body, and then weightlessness. My feet left the ground, and I began to float towards the open window. I should have been terrified, but an eerie calm had settled over me. As I drifted closer to the craft, I had a moment of crystal clarity. Whatever was about to happen, whatever Truths I was about to uncover, there would be no going back. My old life, my understanding of the world, was about to change forever. The next thing I remember is waking up in my bed, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The sun was streaming through my window, and for a moment, I thought it had all been a vivid nightmare. But as I sat up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on my arm, was a strange, intricate pattern of dots, almost like a tattoo, but raised slightly from my skin. I'd never seen anything like it before. I ran my fingers over it, feeling a slight tingling sensation. It was real. Whatever had happened last night, it wasn't just a dream. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing water on my face, trying to clear my head. That's when I noticed something else. A small, barely noticeable scar behind my ear that definitely hadn't been there before. My mind reeled, trying to piece together what had happened. Had I been taken aboard that craft, examined, experimented on? The gaps in my memory were frustrating and terrifying. I spent the next few hours frantically searching online for anyone who had experienced similar markings or scars after a UFO encounter. I found a few similar accounts, but nothing exactly like mine. The pattern on my arm seemed unique, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something, that it was some kind of message or code. Over the next few days, I noticed strange changes in myself. My senses seemed heightened. Colors appeared more vivid, sounds clearer. I found myself understanding complex mathematical concepts that had always eluded me before. At work, I was blazing through tasks that would have taken me days in the past. My colleagues noticed the change, commenting on my increased productivity and focus. But along with these seemingly positive changes came unsettling side effects. I started having vivid, almost prophetic dreams. I'd see flashes of future events, nothing world-changing but small, personal things. A coffee spill before it happened, a surprise visit from an old friend, a minor car accident on my street. At first I tried to brush it off as coincidence, but as these predictions kept coming true, I couldn't deny that something fundamental had changed within me. The most unnerving part was the voice, a soft, genderless whisper that would sometimes speak in my mind, usually when I was alone or in quiet moments. It never said anything clear or direct, just fragmented phrases that made no sense. The convergence approaches. Prepare for the shift. You are a bridge. I tried to engage with it, to ask questions, but it never responded directly. Was I going insane, or had my encounter somehow opened up a channel to something else? As weeks turned into months, I found myself at a crossroads. On one hand, I was tempted to embrace these new abilities, to see where they might lead me. Perhaps I had been chosen for some greater purpose, given a gift that could benefit humanity. But on the other hand, I was terrified. The constant feeling of being watched had never gone away. Sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch glimpses of the men in black, always disappearing when I turned to look directly. Were they real or manifestations of my paranoia? The voice in my head was becoming more insistent, the visions more intense. I feared I was losing touch with reality, but at the same time, I felt more connected to the universe than ever before. I've decided to write this account as a record, a testament to what I've experienced. I don't know what the future holds, or if I'll even remember writing this tomorrow. The pattern on my arm has started to change, shifting and evolving each day. I feel like I'm on the brink of something monumental, a revelation that will change everything. but I'm also scared. Scared of what I might become, of what I might learn. If you're reading this, know that the world is stranger and more wondrous than we can imagine. There are forces at work beyond our comprehension. And sometimes, when the stars align just right, ordinary people like me get caught up in extraordinary events. Whatever happens next, I know my life will never be the same. The truth is out there, and somehow, for better or worse, I've become a part of it. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.